Hey guys, my name is Shai, and in this video I want to talk about Shiva and Parvati. A little bit about their myths, right? The stories about them, a little bit about their energy, and kind of also updating, just using my imagination, my opinion, my feelings on their energy and their stories, kind of updating that into what does that mean for us in our modern developed country lives, right? How do we like translate their energy into our lives right now? So before I jump in, I want to say, because I was just sitting here like staring at my face in the camera going like, this is this is so, on the one hand, I might seem completely unprepared for this video, but on the other hand, this is actually really perfect in terms of aligning with Shiva energy. So let me just explain. So yes, I am sitting on the bathroom floor. Yes, I am in my pajamas, which happens to be a Seahawks ugly Christmas sweater. And this in and of itself, like my presentation here, is a really, really good example of balanced Shiva energy, So I want to describe this anecdote first before I get into the rest of it. So I've been wanting to make this video for a couple of days, and this morning it was like, yes, I really want to make this video because I love Shiva and Parvati energy. Out of like all of the mythological figures, they are probably my favorites. Definitely my favorites, right? But today I was like, oh, the idea of getting dressed and putting my makeup on and like setting up a space for filming just kind of made me want to stab out my eyes. Like I just didn't want to do it, but I still really wanted to make the video. And so I was like, well, you've filmed lots of videos in your pajamas before. Why the struggle with this one, right? And then I kind of realized how this was all really perfect. So why is my presentation here a really good reflection of balanced Shiva energy? Well, for one thing, what you're going to be discovering here is that Shiva energy is all about tearing down pretensions, tearing down excesses of the ego, tearing down things like etiquette and social expectations and perfection and false faces and false fronts and all of that. But at the same time, when Shiva energy goes too far, it would say something like unbalanced Shiva energy that goes too far would never wear a Seahawks ugly Christmas sweater, because unbalanced Shiva energy that has gone too far would say that this is like a branded sweater, right? for something like, big business American football. Unbalanced Shiva energy would say if you own something like that, you shouldn't own something like that and you should destroy that. But of course, I wear this. I mean, I don't give a shit about American football. I only wear this because my husband got it as a gift and it's really, really warm and snuggly, so I wear it in the winter when it's cold, right? So like this sweater, like the fact that I wear this sweater in a kind of just like purely practical terms, going, yes, I have this, I don't mind wearing it, the colors are kind of cool, it's warm and snuggly, I'm gonna wear it, and I'm not going to fixate on getting rid of it just because it seems like it might be pretentious or just because it seems like it might be shallow, right? Allowing it to just be what it is and to just exist without like getting into this whole this whole thing about like that is a false face, or that is something pretentious, or that is something too mainstream, I need to destroy it just because of that. It's like just allowing everything to just kind of be what it is. And so you get into that kind of balanced Shiva energy when Shiva and Parvati, right? Shiva and Parvati are in perfect union, perfect harmony. So this is why, I'm going to be talking a lot about Shiva energy, but Parvati is so absolutely pivotal here, because Shiva energy without Parvati is, the destruction of the universe. Like without Parvati, Shiva, first of all, he's like doesn't function at all, right? Without Parvati, Shiva does not function. He either just collapses in on himself and doesn't function literally at all, doesn't do his function of destroying false faces, right? Of destroying ego. He just ceases to destroy, and then we have this horrible outgrowth of all of these falsities and superficial things, or he doesn't know how to remain in balance, and then he just acts out and destroys the world. So without Parvati, Shiva, without Parvati, the universe falls apart, essentially, because she is the only thing that can keep Shiva energy in balance. So yeah, so before I really get into this, I just wanted to say it doesn't really matter how you understand these kind of mythological figures, these deities, right? If you see Shiva and Parvati as purely fictional characters from old stories, it's perfectly cool. If you see them as like primordial energies, as just like forces of energy in the universe, totally cool. If you see them as actual beings who do exist out there in the universe, totally cool. It doesn't really make a difference. It doesn't really matter. And I honestly see them as all three things all rolled up into one. So you can also see them as like reflections and aspects of ourselves, right? Different ways of thinking about like deity energy, if you do want to look at them like that. So, okay. So for everyone who hasn't like read the Shiva and Parvati myths, I want to do a quick recap. Recapping some of the basic myths about Shiva and Parvati so that we kind of know what we're talking about here. So of course there are many different myths, and there are all kinds of variations, right? So there's no like one correct story. It's just many different episodes, many different variations, many different ways of looking at their archetypes and their journeys. So I'm just going to be kind of boiling it all down and regurgitating it out just to kind of give you the general gist of some of the more prominent themes of these myths, okay? So Shiva and Parvati, and Parvati has lots of names. I'm using the word Parvati, her name Parvati, because that's the one that really always comes to me and resonates with me. But she's also, we can say Shiva and Shakti when they are primordial forces in the universe, right? Primordial forces in the universe. It helps if you know a little bit about Hindu, like the Hindu view, like cosmology, right? The Hindu cosmology, where there is the Hindu Trinity, okay? The Hindu Trinity, you have Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Brahma being the creative energy that creates the world, Vishnu being the preserving energy that preserves and maintains the world, and Shiva being the energy that destroys the world, right? Destroys the world. But interestingly, Shiva is not seen as an evil figure. He's not seen as, like don't equivocate, how do you say that? He's not the equivalent really of the Christian idea of the devil. He's not, because he is really, he's worshipped basically equally to Vishnu. Vishnu being the preserving energy and Shiva being the destructive energy, because it is really understood in many Hindu traditions about how Shiva is like necessary, right? Destruction is necessary in order to create something new. So it's also very like scorpionic type of energy, Scorpio energy, because it's the death and destruction in order to create new life, right? So the unwinding, the destruction, the death, and the rebirth. And like it's really understood how like benevolent and beautiful this process of death, destruction, and rebirth is to the existence, right? To existence itself. And so each one of these, in the Hindu Trinity, there's the masculine and the feminine. So you have Shiva, right? And he's the masculine side, and then you have his feminine side being Shiva and Shakti, or Shiva and Sati, or Shiva and Parvati. And Parvati is also, if you know Kali, a lot of people know Kali Ma, the Hindu goddess Kali Ma, the really fierce, really very fierce, violent kind of mother figure, right? She's also considered an incarnation of Parvati, and you could go on and on. There's a whole rabbit hole with all of the different faces and aspects of Parvati, but yeah. So Parvati or Shakti is the feminine counterpart, the feminine half. They're really Shiva and Shakti. Shiva and Parvati are two aspects of essentially one energy or one being. And when I'm tuning into like the primordial like cosmological forces here of Shiva and Shakti, what I always see is, imagine like a beam of light just a beam of light. Imagine you're in the void. There is nothing but a single beam of light, and there are two beings traveling along this beam of light, and they're just blobs of consciousness. They're just blobs of awareness. The one going in front is Shiva. He is traveling the road, the beam of light, the rainbow road, the road of light first, and what he's doing is destroying this beam of light, destroying it, sending fractals of light everywhere. It's all just coming apart. As soon as he touches the light, it just shatters into all of these little facets and fragments and fractals of light that just scatter everywhere. And then, but luckily for all that exists, Shakti is coming up behind him, and she gathers all of the particles of light, all of the fractals of light. She gathers them all up. She's grabbing them. And they're also just flowing to her because she's like this like magnetic, absorptive energy. And then behind her, she's creating something new, right? She's creating something new. So Shiva, like, it's not even really about destroying, right? But it's about breaking apart, because you can't really create anything out of like a specific beam of light. It's like if you had a beam of steel, it's hard to really make anything with that. Or like a loaf of bread even. You have to cut the bread up before you can do anything with it, right? You can't make French toast with like a loaf of bread, right? You can only make French toast when you slice the bread up. So Shiva's energy is like that, making things into smaller pieces, busting things apart so that the feminine force coming behind him, Shakti, can gather all the pieces and weave together something new, right? Weave together something new. It's like, another metaphor is like, Shiva would be the energy that shears the sheep, and then the sheep shearer passes the wool. Traditionally it's usually been the women, right? And then the women take the wool and clean it and spin it into yarn and then weave fabric out of it so you can create the fabric. And in this metaphor, creating the fabric of existence. So this is how absolutely integral both of these forces are on the primordial level. And then coming down into the kind of mythological zone, we can just think of it in terms of like, the myths that have been passed down, right? The stories go that Shiva and Sati, now she's known as Sati, S-A-T-I, Shiva and Sati incarnate, in the Himalayas as, essentially God and goddess figures, and they're living their lives, right? But it's interesting because these stories, it's even though they're known to be God and goddess, they're also kind of living human lives. So that's an interesting thing to play with about, what's the difference? What's the difference between God and goddess and human, right? Really maybe there isn't one, right? I would normally, my normal opinion would be that there really isn't one. So anyway, you have Shiva and Sati, and this is important because this is how things really, this part of the legend, this part of the mythos is where things kind of go wrong, right? Because Shiva's all out there being Shiva, being a little bit of a wild child, right? Impossible to control, kind of partying, doing whatever it is that he desires to be doing. And Sati is kind of she's kind of a princess figure, right? She's from a well-bred family, and her parents don't really want her, especially her father, don't really want her marrying Shiva because he's seen as like this wild guy who doesn't really, like, how could he possibly marry into a royal family, right? How could he possibly be worthy of like this princess, right? But she goes off and marries him anyway because she loves him, and that's what she does. And then one day, there's so many different versions of this, but basically what happens is Sati's father is throwing a big party, and her father does not invite Shiva because he doesn't want Shiva there at the party because he thinks that Shiva is horrible and disgusting and wild and rude and gross and all of that. So Shiva is not invited to Sati's father's party, and she shows up and is all like really pissed off. Like, how could you not invite my husband? Like, I am your daughter. How could you not invite my husband to your party? And then Shiva also shows up, but he shows up like drunk, okay, and he shows up, like there's stories about him wearing like a bloody bear skin. It's like he doesn't try to fit in with like the court. He doesn't try to like appropriately show up to the party, to this nice fine gathering, to this banquet, right? He shows up and he's drunk and he's not dressed and he's disheveled and his hair is dirty and he's going around with really obnoxious behavior. And, you know, Sati's father is like, you know, banishing him, trying to kick him out. And essentially Sati, the myths always talk about how she immolates herself, like she like literally explodes in fire, she ignites. And I really understand this to mean like she gets so fucking pissed off, like a level of wrath here, like rage, I don't even think comes into it. To me, this is wrath. This is her being consumed with wrath, and I think this is my interpretation here. This is how I feel it. This is how I sense this. It's like she becomes so enraged, and I think she's mad at both sides, right? She's pissed off at her father for like, why do you have to make this so difficult? Why couldn't you have just invited my husband to your stupid party, right? And she's mad at Shiva. She's mad at her husband, going like, why couldn't you just like wash your hair, put on some proper clothes, and show up to this party and be normal? Like, what's wrong with you? Like, I love you, but like, why do you have to make this so difficult for me, right? Why can't you just compromise? Why can't you just do this one thing, right? If you want to be invited to the party, why can't you just act normally, act socially appropriately enough just for one night, just for this one party, right? And so I really feel that Sati here is caught between these two worlds, right? Caught between the world of her father, which is all, you know, society, high class, social expectations, everything being proper, everything being perfect, everybody following the etiquette, you know, doing the whole hierarchy, nobility type of thing, and the world of her husband, which is the world that she chose. She's essentially descended, right, coming down from this princess type of lifestyle into essentially going off into the wilderness to live in a cave with Shiva. And you know, that's the life that she's chose, and she does like that lifestyle. She likes, you know, I really get the sense that she is more comfortable there. She feels more wild and free, right? That is also who she is. She's not just self-sacrificing. We'll get more into this later. She's not just self-sacrificing to be with Shiva. It's also where she finds herself, right? That is who she is. And that is the life that she chooses. But at the same time, she can also navigate between the worlds, right? She can navigate between high society and the wilderness. She can navigate between the light and the darkness. She can move between the two. She finds the balance. She is essentially the balance point. She is the bridge between these two worlds. And she gets so furious and so frustrated, like, why can't these two sides just get along? Why can't they find some common ground? Why can't they just, for one day, why can't these two sides just keep it together, right? And that's why she like explodes in total wrath and, you know, and in fire, right? The story is always that it is ignited in flame. So she dies. Sati dies. And after this, Shiva, this is when, you know, he is so overcome with inconsolable grief that he just retires to his cave and essentially goes there to sulk. And of course, these old myths always talk about how he is a great ascetic, right? A great ascetic. He's there and he's meditating in his meditation cave as a hermit, as an ascetic, right? He's rejecting the world, he's rejecting everything, and he's just kind of mostly naked, sitting in his cave, like just ignoring the world. And in some of the myths, he falls into like a deep trance state of meditation for thousands of years even, just being basically completely almost comatose. And this is because he literally ceases to function without Parvati. He cannot be without Parvati. You know, that's how I think of her. That's the name I use accidentally, right? And so this goes on for a while, when Shiva is still sitting there in his hermit cave, doing nothing, right? Not interacting with the world, not doing anything. And meanwhile, Shakti, Sati, Parvati is out there, you know, in the universe. She's returned, you know, back to the higher realms. And they're separated, right? They're separated. And this goes on for so long that Shiva has stopped destroying the world, right? He has stopped his act of destruction. And like, why is that bad, right? Why would it be bad to have Shiva ceasing his acts of destruction? Honestly, there's such a good metaphor for this, right? It's a pretty common story about Yellowstone National Park in the US, right? Where there were no wolves, right? All of the wolves were, there were no more wolves. And that was causing the entire park to be destroyed because there were no apex predators to keep the deer in check, and then there were too many deer, and the deer were causing like erosion on the banks of the rivers, and it was like the whole ecosystem was dying because the apex predator had been removed, right? And it threw everything out of balance, out of balance. So if you want like an ecological metaphor, that's a really commonly known one about like why destruction on some level needs to happen, why apex predators are so important. And I don't really see Shiva as an apex predator, so maybe that's not exactly good, but it's an example of like how everything can be thrown out of balance when destruction is ceased, right? And on a more like social human level, right, what happens when Shiva's energy stops? Well, then you get, it's almost like the Vishnu energy, or just the energy of preservation, when that just goes on forever. Like when you get complete social stagnation, right? Just, I don't know, maybe you can think of a culture that has just stagnated and stagnated and stagnated and just been the same forever, right? Forever. Maybe, people like that, people who never change in their lives. And it's like they a certain way by the time they're 12, and when they're 90 years old, they're still the exact same way. And although there is, obviously, we love preservation, and there is so much that we do want to preserve, but anything, when it becomes unbalanced, even preservation, right? Even the preservation of life, when it becomes unbalanced, when it's like, that's all that there is, that isn't, like, that's never good, right? Nothing out of balance, nothing good ever comes from an energy being out of balance. So too much preservation just means things stagnate. It means nothing ever changes. And of course, that means like bad things are being preserved like forever and ever and ever, right? Things you don't want are being preserved forever and ever and ever. And I also really feel, and this is not typically not typically discussed in the myths, because you know how these old stories, they were written a long time ago, and they were written not in English, right? And we think differently now, we tell stories differently now, and I think it's important to kind of update the understanding of the basic essence behind the story, right? So I really feel that also what this is getting at is like the outgrowth of egoic structures. And so you have things like, things that are really, really superficial, right? Caring so much about what you look when you go outside, right? You get things like, the Instagram effect, right? Everybody being so obsessed about what you look like and feeling like you can't put your face on Instagram without being picture perfect. And you get like etiquette, right? Social etiquette, which is, of course, social etiquette can be very convenient. It can be very fun. It can be beautiful. It gives you things like weddings and professional banquets and professional conferences and all these things. Etiquette in and of itself is not bad. It's just a type of game we invent in order to have a type of experience. Etiquette gives us an experience. It gives us structures to have a certain type of ambiance in our lives, and that's not bad. But of course, when you get too much of it, then you have people going like, you don't fit in, you're not following the social rules, you're not following the etiquette, therefore we're going to ostracize you, right? It's easy to think about what happens when we get etiquette going out of control, right? So when Shiva stops destroying egoic structures, you get a lot of like falsity in the world, and we even lose touch with who we are, right? Because we become more fixated on what we're presenting, more fixated on what we're putting out there than who we really are on the inside, and we get trapped inside of like egoic like social structures that are all about following social rules and following social norms and all of that. So you can really, I could talk a lot about this, but I don't want to fixate on this too much, but you could really explore that, going like, what happens when Shiva stops destroying the outgrowth of the ego, right? The outgrowth of the ego. It's exactly like a garden that no one is tending, right? You need to have a beautiful garden. You need to go in there and you need to weed, right? You need to go in there and you need to weed. And if you're thinking in terms of, well, the nature doesn't have a gardener, right? Well, nature does have a gardener, right? If you're in the forest, you have predators and you have animals eating the leaves, and you have, the natural destructive process of nature is tending to itself, right? So the natural destructive process of nature is tending to itself. But in human society, we can sometimes shut down the Shiva energy. We can sometimes shut down the process of change, the process of destruction so much that we end up allowing our garden to just be full of weeds, right? So essentially that was happening. That was happening down on earth, like, according to these stories, according to the myths. And, the powers that be, the higher beings, whatever beings you want to think of that were kind of overseeing this, they were noticing that Shiva was just sitting in his cave. Shiva was not destroying anything. He was not doing his job of destruction. And so everything was stagnating and everything was getting full of weeds, right? And they essentially went to Parvati and begged her to return to Earth. Okay, and she was like, nah, I'm okay. Like, I love my Shiva, but, I'm not going back there. I'm not going back down there. That place sucked, right? I'm not going back. I'm good. So they begged her and they begged her and they begged her, and they said, you are the only one. Like, you are Shiva's other half. You are the only one who can make sure that he is in balance. You are the only one who can make sure that he can do his job, because there's also some incidences where Shiva comes out of his cave and is suddenly destroying everything, right? And that's when you get out of balance Shiva energy, where it's like he doesn't know what to destroy and he doesn't know when to do it. It's like he's just suddenly and explosively causing random acts of destruction, and that's not helpful either, right? So they beg and they beg and they beg, and finally she's like, fine, I'll go back down there and I'll keep this guy in line, right? So she comes back down into Earth, and she's again born as a princess on a mountain. It starts with a K. I can't pronounce it. It's like Kailash, Mount Kailash. That's probably not the pronunciation, but anyway. And so when she's a little girl, she is realizing who she is, and she's like, I'm here to love Shiva. I am here to, I am Shiva's other half. Shiva is my other half. We are here to be together. And she knows. She's born and she knows. And there are so many different versions of this part of how Parvati ends up finally winning the heart of Shiva. But essentially, when she grows up, she goes and seeks out Shiva, even though her father is like, you can't marry Lord Shiva. Why would I allow my daughter to marry Lord Shiva? He's been sitting in his cave just rotting away and being gross for thousands of years, right? But she's like, nope, this is who I am. This is my destiny. So she goes off and she finds Shiva, and in some versions of the myths, because he's deep in a comatose trance-like state, he opens his third eye and just destroys her and instantly kills her. And in some versions of the myth, she has to reincarnate hundreds of times, and every single time, over and over and over again, she's just like, there's nothing for it. I just have to keep being born, and I go to see Shiva in his cave, and if he kills me again, I just keep going back, and I just keep going back, because this is who I am. This is who we are. This is who we are, right? This is who we are. I just have to keep trying, right? There's nothing for it. Just imagine if the person you loved the most was stuck in some type of coma, and you knew that if you could just get through to them, that they would wake up and everything would be perfect, right? You would be happily together, right? I mean, if you knew that you had to die and be reborn over and over and over again, I mean, if you knew you had infinite lives ahead of you and there was really nothing else to be doing and you just had to keep trying, that's what you would do, right? So she just does this over and over and over again. And in some versions of the myths, she essentially has to go through her own journey, right? Before she can really get through to him, before she can wake him up, because he doesn't recognize her, right? He's so deep still in his grief. He's still grieving Sati, right? He's still grieving his wife Sati. And he doesn't necessarily recognize that Parvati is Sati reborn, because he's just so he's so messed up, right? He's so messed up because he's been without her, and without Parvati, Shiva does not function. So then there's this whole process of her going through her own journey to essentially become a vibrational match to Shiva. That's what I really feel this is about. She essentially has to, in some of the versions, she does this on her own, or circumstances take her through this. On some versions, Shiva basically tells her this is what you have to do, and she kind of goes through these tasks. It depends. But essentially, she has to reject her home, right? She comes down off of the mountain. This is her descension cycle again, right? She descends to earth, but then she still has to descend again, like on earth. She goes through another descension cycle, a reflection of her descension cycle now that she's on earth. She has to leave her family behind, right? She has to go out into the wilderness, and she has to experience like the loss of everything, right? She loses the clothes on her back. She meditates, right? She sits and she meditates. She fasts, right? She goes through dark, horrible, cold winters until she's nothing, you know, but barefoot, walking in the wilderness, fasting and meditating, and she like loses everything that she was. And this is she is going through the process of Shiva energy, right? Because she is shedding away all of those pretenses. She is shedding away everything that was false, everything that was unnecessary, everything that was not truly her, right? Because she was born into this, again, like a princess type of lifestyle, a privileged life, and she has to shed that all away because none of that is truly her, right? All of that is the kind of stuff that Shiva energy is meant to destroy, right? To destroy, because it is an outgrowth, right? It is an outgrowth. So when she finally gets to the state, and she's also like, this is really interesting because vibrationally speaking, right, you can think about woman, what she's doing on a human level or whatever, but vibrationally speaking, she's trying to get herself down into Shiva's level, right? This is so important. In order to get through to him, she has to connect with him, but she can't connect with him until she's the same, until she feels what he feels, right? And what has he been feeling? He's been feeling complete loss. He is in grief of everything that he has lost, because when he lost Sati, he lost everything. He lost everything. She was his life. She was his reason for being. She was everything to him. So she has to lose everything, right? She loses her home. She loses her family. She loses her friends. She loses her warmth, her health, even she loses everything, right? Just imagine being like wearing nothing but like a simple white dress that's probably pretty dirty and ragged now, and freezing and fasting and starving and doing nothing but meditating. But also that is how you find, you know, your soul. That is how you find what you truly are, because you have lost literally everything. And it is when she has experienced that level of loss and that level of, you know, she's probably been grieving through this process, and maybe she's been wondering, why did I do this to myself, right? I could go back to my father's castle and be a princess again, but no, I'm not going to do that, because she, you know, she doesn't. She never decides to go back. She never gives up on this journey, right? No matter how hard it is, she knows that this is her path, right? So she loses everything until she gets down there and she has experienced true, complete loss. But in her moment of experiencing true, complete loss of everything, that's when she discovers who she really is. And once she discovers who she really is, that's when Shiva can recognize her. That's when Shiva recognizes her, because now she sees herself for who she really is, and then Shiva can see herself for who she really is. And Shiva also recognizes, wow, you have gone through complete deprivation. You have, you know, meditated. You have been an ascetic. You have fasted. You have lost everything, and you have grieved, and you have walked in the wilderness, in the cold, alone, in the dark, barefoot, right? And then he goes, oh my God, you are like me. And oh my God, now I know who you are. Now I know who you are. And then he recognizes her, and he recognizes that she is the reincarnation of his wife, Sati. And then that's like his moment of huge awakening, right? He opens up all three of his eyes at that point, and is like, oh my God. Like, and then from there on, you know, they get married and they go off and they sort of live happily ever after, right? I'd say it's pretty much a happily ever after. There are still some like incidences, right? And that this is like the divine union, right? The divine marriage between Shiva and Parvati, when they have both completed their descension cycle and found each other at the bottom of the descension, when they have both lost everything and they find themselves, and then they find each other, and then they have union, and then they can go off. And this is when they now can operate in balance, because now they go off and essentially be husband and wife. They be a family. You know, they even have kids. There's stories about that, which I'm not going to really get into in this particular video. But now that they are together, Shiva learns to be in balance. He actually becomes normal, right? The myths always talk about now Shiva becomes a householder. That's the word that's always used. A householder essentially becomes a husband. He is still Shiva, right? Is still wild, is still kind of a fringe type of figure, but he has a house and a home with a wife and a family, and he provides for them, and there's like a sense of normalcy there. And one of my favorite stories of Shiva and Parvati is one of the stories of their wedding. Okay, when First, he shows up to like their engagement feast or something like that, and he shows up again, drunk, completely disheveled, dirty, wearing like a bloody bear skin, right? And Parvati's father is again like, I'm not going to allow you to marry my daughter if you're like that, right? And then Shiva like leaves, and Parvati follows him and is like, look, I love you, but damn, can't you just, for one fucking day, why can't you just get it together? Why can't you just go shave and, take a shower and like put on some normal clothes and just like show up to this thing just for one day, just for our wedding day? Can't you just be like, can't you just do this just for one day, right? And something clicks, right? Something clicks, and he's like, oh, well, would it really be that hard, right? Would it really be that hard? Would it really be that bad? Like, he just finally gets it. And so he goes off and, he takes a shower and he shaves and he puts on his tuxedo, right? If we're converting this into modern Western thinking. And then he shows up on their wedding day, and he essentially looks like, I don't know, I always think of it as he looks like Apollo, right? He looks like a golden god. He looks like the perfect specimen of man because he put in just a little bit of effort, and he did this for his love for Parvati. And this is really important for him because he is now learning to walk between the worlds. He is learning that this doesn't have to be a threat to him, right? He doesn't have to see a banquet of rich people and immediately hate it and immediately try to destroy it. He doesn't have to crash every single wedding, right? He can just be normal for a day, and he can kind of keep it together for a day, and he can stop destroying things for a day because maybe this thing doesn't need to be destroyed. Because I think he kind of thinks like, oh my God, why would I want to destroy my own wedding, right? Why would I destroy my own wedding? Maybe this doesn't need to be destroyed. Not today, right? So he shows up, and he is so stunningly beautiful, and he looks like the golden god, that he really is. And Shiva's parents, like, he wins them over instantly, because he feels like at this point he looks like so not like so worthy. He's suddenly so worthy of their daughter that they love him, right? That they love him. And it's all because Parvati was just like, just get it together for one day, right? Just get it together for one day, and then you can go back to being weird and crazy. And so like this is how Parvati, right? This is how Parvati, and see, she doesn't really she's not forcing anything. She is in the middle, right? She's in the middle between these two worlds, and that inspires Shiva because he loves her so much to also meet her in the middle. And then now they are in balance. So that now the Shiva energy can go around destroying things that need to be destroyed, right? Maybe, I guess, if Shiva sees something that really has really become excessive, I think at this point when the Shiva energy is in balance, the energy only destroys things that are truly excessive, that are truly damaging. That it's like there's this intuitive sense of like, this is something, it's time for that to be destroyed. Its time has come, right? Its time is over. But he no longer goes around just being insulting and being horrible and like trying to destroy everything just for the sake of it, right? There's no more destruction for destruction's sake, but it becomes like a selective destruction, exactly like a gardener going around, pulling the weeds, right? Only the weeds need to be destroyed. And then, of course, at the end of the year, when the garden has died, right? When all the leaves have dropped, when all the flowers have dropped, then the gardener comes in and like tears up everything, right? So he becomes essentially a gardener of the world, a gardener of the ego, a gardener of social structures, only destroying things that truly need to be destroyed, not just going around with wanton destruction. And this is only because of Parvati, right? Parvati is like honestly, she's like the keystone of the universe, because without her, Shiva energy does not function. It either is not doing anything or it's destroying everything. It's like Shiva energy by himself is complete extreme of like non-functioning or like destroying nothing or completely destroying everything. And it is only through Parvati's wisdom, through her own inner sense of balance, through her own innate ability to be this middle ground, to be the bridge, to walk between the worlds. Without her, nothing can really exist. That's why I love Shiva and Parvati energy. Like, I love the myths, right? I love their stories. I love tuning into their energy out there in the universe. I love them as figures that come to me. You know, I have intuitive encounters, energetic encounters with their energy, and like with them as beings and as figures, and it's just, I don't know. They're so my favorite. They're my absolute favorite. And this video has been very long, but this is how much I am just, I don't know. They're so interesting to me. I'm so in love with their stories, with their energy, and I don't know. This is just my expression of that, and I wanted to share, just to share this, to share my thoughts, to share. You know, if you don't want to go off and read all of their myths, and now you have a little bit of an idea of kind of the general gist of how their stories go. You know, you've been introduced to their energy, so you can see how that works. And it also gives you, well, it gives me anyway, and maybe hopefully it'll give someone else, a way of looking at managing destruction in your own life and managing your own pretensions, right? Just like, I'm just thinking like, you know, doing this whole video in this Seahawks ugly Christmas sweater, right? Unbalanced Shiva energy, the one that wants to destroy everything, would look at an ugly Christmas sweater branded with Seahawks on it. And you know, that energy would go, that needs to be destroyed because that is pretentious and that is corporate and that is bad, right? That should be destroyed. But when Shiva energy is in perfect balance, you go, well, you already have this sweater. It's warm and snuggly. There's no reason to get rid of it just because it is superficial or because it is mainstream or because it is corporate or whatever. It can just be, and it doesn't need to be destroyed. So it's when the Shiva and Parvati energy is in perfect balance, and I think as we practice that in our lives, it gives this really, really deep sense of equanimity and of just neutrality and non-duality, and everything just kind of falls into place from that mindset. So I think you can really run with this, run with these energies, run with the practicing of the balance of the Shiva and the Parvati energy, and like the balance between destruction and preservation, knowing when to destroy and when to just let something be, right? Picking your battles, all of that. It's endlessly fascinating. So I guess I'm going to call it quits for now. So sending you guys so much love and light. Bye.